Welcome to the deep dive. If you're listening, chances are you've, dreamt about practicing medicine beyond your home country's borders.
It's a big dream for many doctors.
Absolutely. And for international medical graduates, IMGs, the opportunities, well, they're vast. But navigating those complex licensing exams, it can often feel like trying to decipher a really dense medical textbook.
Yeah, maybe one written in a slightly different language, too. It is definitely a daunting prospect.
So our mission today is really to offer you a bit of a strategic shortcut. We're going to try and demystify that often overwhelming process.
Make it a bit clearer.
Exactly. By breaking down three of the most sought-after pathways for IMGs, the USMLE for the United States, the PLAB for the United Kingdom, and the AMC for Australia.
3 major destinations.
Right. Our goal is to equip you listening with the detailed, practical insights you need to make an informed choice, one that truly aligns with your individual aspirations and, your unique circumstances.
And that choice, as you know, it's one of the most critical decisions in any medical professional's journey. It really profoundly impacts your entire career trajectory.
And your lifestyle, too, I imagine. Financial planning.
Absolutely. And beyond just the exams, pursuing a medical career abroad, it invariably involves significant personal sacrifice, a substantial financial investment, and, well, considerable cultural adaptation.
That's a huge piece, the adaptation.
It is. Understanding these inherent challenges and the high stakes involved is truly fundamental to comprehensive planning. You can't really skip that part.
That's a crucial point. So let's unpack this strategic puzzle, starting with what many consider the biggest challenge of them all, the USMLE, the pathway to practice in the United States.
The big one, yeah.
It's a comprehensive 3-step examination for U.S. medical licensure, co-sponsored by the FSMB and the NBME.
Right, the Federation of State Medical Boards and the National Board of Medical Examiners.
And its core purpose isn't just about testing your memory, right? It's designed to assess your ability to apply essential medical knowledge, concepts, principles.
And those fundamental patient-centered skills, everything crucial for safe and effective care. It's about application, not just recall.
What sets the USMLE apart then? Its rigor.
Definitely its rigor. The examination materials are meticulously created, reviewed, updated annually by hundreds of volunteers, medical educators, clinicians.
Wow, hundreds.
Yeah, which means, you can't just rely on rote memorization of old facts. You have to stay incredibly current with medical advancements because it's a dynamic assessment. They're testing your practical application of knowledge, not just ticking boxes.
And it truly is a multi-step marathon. Could you maybe walk us through the unique focus and format of each of the USMLE's 3 steps?
Absolutely. So step 1 focuses on the basic sciences, health, disease, therapeutic interventions. Think of it as a demanding full-day exam.
How long, roughly?
Typically around 8 hours long, challenging you with hundreds of multiple choice questions spread across several timed blocks.
Okay, 8 hours. That's intense.
It is. Then there's step 2CK, clinical knowledge. This evaluates your application of medical knowledge and clinical skills, but more for supervised patient care.
So moving towards the clinic.
Exactly. With a specific focus on health promotion and disease prevention, another full-day exam, usually 9 hours this time.
9 hours, okay.
And finally, step 3. This is sort of the capstone for unsupervised practice, emphasizing patient management, particularly in ambulatory settings.
And this one's even longer.
It stretches across 2 days. Day 1, called Foundations of Independent Practice, or FIP, is around 7 hours. But Day 2, Advanced Clinical Medicine, ACM, that's 9 hours.
9 hours again.
And crucially, Day 2 includes computer-based case simulations, CCS. These aren't just multiple choice.
Right, you mentioned those. What are they like?
They're dynamic, interactive scenarios. You make clinical decisions. The patient responds based on your input, forcing you to think on your feet, much like real patient care. It's a true test of clinical reasoning, going way beyond just rote learning.
That progressive structure really does mirror the real-world progression of medical training, from basics to complex management.
It's designed that way.
So for an IMG listening, what are the absolute non-negotiables to even get your foot in the door, eligibility-wise? Are there common pitfalls people fall into?
A critical starting point is your medical school. For steps 1 and 2CK, you must be currently enrolled in or a graduate of a medical school outside the U.S. or Canada.
Yeah, outside U.S. Canada.
And it needs to be listed in the World Directory of Medical Schools with an ECFMG note confirming eligibility. You also need to have completed at least 2 years of med school specifically, the basic sciences part.
Basic science is done. Got it.
For step 3, well, you need to have passed step 1 and 2CK, hold that MD equivalent from a World Directory listed school, And crucially, achieve ECFMG certification.
ECFMG certification. That sounds key.
It absolutely is. And here's something you absolutely need to remember. You must be a medical school student or graduate at the time of your application and on your actual test day.
Both times. Okay.
ECFMG certification is the indispensable gateway, and it requires really meticulous planning. ECFMG typically takes about 3 weeks just to process an application.
3 weeks, okay.
And all supporting documents must be received within 4 weeks of your online submission. Otherwise, your application might just get rejected.
Wow, tight deadlines.
So prompt action is critical here. You can't let things slide.
Meticulous planning certainly extends to the financial side too, I bet. This sounds like a significant financial investment. Can you give us a sense of the costs involved?
Oh, it absolutely is a substantial investment. For example, exam fees alone, looking at the 2025 figures, are typically over $1,000 each for Step 1 and Step 2 CK.
1,000 each.
And close to $1,000 for Step 3. Plus, if you take these exams outside the US and Canada, there's an additional international surcharge.
How much is that?
Over $200 per exam. And then you factor in essential preparation resources like UWorld, which, can cost several $100s for a year's access.
Which most people probably need, right?
Most people find it essential, yeah. So the cumulative cost can easily run into thousands of dollars, and the subscription model of these resources means that longer study periods, or heaven forbid, reattempts, significantly increase your expenses.
Makes sense. So there's a clear financial benefit to passing first time.
Huge financial benefit. Exact figures, by the way. We'll make sure those are available in our show notes for everyone.
Great. That's a serious investment. What about the time commitment? What does a realistic preparation timeline look like for someone tackling this beast?
Well, the USMLE journey often starts early in medical school for many. For dedicated study periods, you're typically looking at maybe 6-10 weeks for Step 1.
Okay. Couple of months dedicated.
Yeah. Then 4 to 8 weeks for Step 2 CK, often with a commitment of like 4 or 5 hours daily.
Still pretty intense.
Definitely. And then for Step 3, it might be 8-12 weeks part-time while working, or some people do an intensive 2-week block if they can swing it.
And resources. You mentioned UWorld.
Yeah, UWorld is often considered the gold standard. Along with that, NBME self-assessments are crucial. The First Aid for the USMLE Step 1 book is famous.
Ah, yes, first aid.
Pathoma, Boards and Beyond, Sketch Medical for visual learners, and Kingdex for spaced repetition. Lots out there.
So strategy-wise, what works?
Strategies really focus on daily timed question blocks, maybe 40, 80 questions a day, sometimes more, and thoroughly reviewing all the explanations, not just for the ones you got wrong, but the right ones too, to solidify why they're right.
Good point. Reinforce the reasoning.
And prioritizing your weaker areas, obviously. Don't just stick to what you're good at.
Now, you mentioned Step 1 is pass-fail now. How has that changed things?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic we've observed. While seemingly reducing pressure, the move to pass-fail has actually coincided with a drop in pass rates for IMGs.
Really? Why do you think that is?
It suggests, perhaps, that a more relaxed attitude can paradoxically increase the risk of failure. You still need to maintain a really rigorous approach.
So no slacking off just because it's pass-fail?
Absolutely not. And beyond just the knowledge, those demanding 8 to 9 hour exam days require physical and mental conditioning.
Like running a marathon.
Exactly. Think of practice exams as stamina trainers. It's crucial to incorporate regular exercise, relaxation techniques, and get adequate sleep aim for 7-8 hours to avoid burnout.
Any specific techniques for stress?
Things like box breathing can be incredibly helpful for managing stress right there during the exam. Simple but effective.
Good tip. So after conquering these steps, passing the exams, what about the career pathways? That all-important residency match for IMGs.
Right. Passing all steps is, of course, mandatory for U.S. medical licensure, and that's followed by a 3-6-year residency program, depending on the specialty.
And the match process.
The residency match, managed by the NRMP, is a highly organized, centralized process. It involves ERAS applications, that's the electronic system that interviews, and finally submitting rank order lists of where you want to go and where programs want you. Match day in March is the big reveal.
Sounds nail-biting.
It absolutely is. But here's the biggest hurdle for IMGs. Securing a U.S. residency is arguably the most significant challenge in the whole pathway.
More than the exams themselves.
For many, yes. Match rates for IMGs are substantially lower than for U.S. medical graduates. We're talking about 60.8% for those who actually submit a rank order list, but maybe closer to 50% when you consider all IMG applicants who start the process.
That's a big difference.
It is, and USMLE's success alone isn't enough. You need a robust application portfolio, including crucial U.S. clinical experience observerships, externships, and strong letters of recommendation from U.S. physicians.
So connections and local experience matter a lot.
Immensely. And practically, for a good shot at matching, you might need to apply to a vast number of programs, potentially 100, even up to 170 programs.
Wow. That's a lot of applications. And fees.
Exactly. It adds another substantial financial burden just for the application fees alone.
Are there specialties that are generally more welcoming to IMGs?
Yes. Based on the percentage of IMGs matched, some tend to be more IMG friendly. Internal medicine is a big one. Family medicine, neurology, pediatrics, pathology also takes a good number.
Okay. And that step 1 pass-fail change any impact on residency selection?
Yeah, we're seeing this ripple effect where because step 1 doesn't provide a score anymore, step 2 CK scores, research, letters of recommendation, maybe even step 3 scores, if taken early, could become even more critical for residency programs looking to differentiate candidates.
They need something objective to compare.
Exactly. Post-residency, though, the landscape truly opens up. A wide array of specialized practices, cardiology, oncology, surgery, or primary care, hospitalist roles, academic positions, research, tons of options.
So to sum up the USMLE pathway then, could you boil down the key pros and cons for an IMG considering this?
Sure. On the plus side, you definitely get access to top-notch medical training, often world-class. During residency, you might find a better work-life balance and more predictable hours compared to some other systems. Excellent research opportunities abound. And the system is often perceived as having less corruption.
Okay, those are strong positives. And the downsides?
Well, it's significantly more time-consuming and costly than the other pathways, generally speaking. There's the challenging struggle for various visas, which is a whole other layer of complexity. It can be emotionally taxing being far from family and friends. And depending where you land, adjusting to unpredictable weather can even be a factor.
Don't forget the weather.
Okay.
That gives us a really clear picture of the USMLE route.
It's a major undertaking.
Definitely. We've seen the rigorous path to the U.S., but what about a different approach? Let's cross the Atlantic now and explore the PLAB, your potential gateway to practicing medicine in the United Kingdom. Tell us about its core purpose.
Right, the PLAB, the Professional and Linguistic Assessments Board Test. It's designed specifically to ensure that doctors qualified abroad have the necessary knowledge and skills for UK practice.
UK specific.
Very UK specific. It evaluates IMGs essentially to the standard of a Foundation Year 2 doctor, or FY2. That's basically the level of a UK-trained physician with 2 years of supervised clinical experience post-graduation.
So ready for that second year of residency, essentially.
Pretty much. This pathway is directly aligned with the specific requirements of the UK's National Health Service, the NHS. So it's about making sure IMGs are prepared for the practical demands of working within that system from day one.
What does that mean in practice, being aligned with the NHS?
Well, what's often overlooked here is that this direct alignment means your preparation isn't just about passing an exam. It's about internalizing the specific nuances of UK patient interactions, NHS guidelines, ethical framework.
The cultural context again.
Exactly. Failing to adapt to, say, the UK's emphasis on shared decision-making or its strict data protection protocols, that can be a major pitfall, even if your pure clinical knowledge is excellent.
That's a crucial distinction. So how was the PLAB structured? Is it as complex as the USMLE?
It's simpler in structure, generally seen as having 2 main parts. PLAB 1 is a written exam.
Multiple choice.
Yes, 180 single best answer multiple choice questions lasting 3 hours. It focuses heavily on clinical scenarios reflecting UK practice, and it's held 4 times a year worldwide.
Okay, accessible globally. And part 2.
Then there's PLAB 2. This is the practical part, an objective structured clinical examination, or OSCE.
The hands-on assessment.
Right. It involves 16 clinical scenarios or stations. Each is 8 minutes long, plus you get 2 minutes reading time beforehand. So the whole thing is about 3 hours and 10 minutes.
What kind of skills are they testing in the OSCE?
It tests your communication skills, clinical examination skills, and practical procedural skills, often using actors as patients or sometimes mannequins. And a key insight here is that PLAB 2 assesses performance across 3 distinct domains: data gathering, technical and assessment skills, clinical management skills, and crucially, interpersonal skills.
Interpersonal skills really emphasized.
That's very much so. It reflects the UK's strong patient-centered approach. However, there's a really important logistical challenge with PLAB too.
What's that?
It is conducted exclusively at the General Medical Council's assessment centres in Manchester, UK.
Only in Manchester. Wow.
Only Manchester. So this immediately introduces significant logistical and financial considerations for IMGs. You have to think about travel, accommodation, visas, all just to take part two.
It definitely needs factoring into the plan. So who is eligible to actually sit for these PLAB exams?
To be eligible, you need a primary medical qualification, your medical degree from a university listed in the World Directory of Medical Schools, and it has to be one approved by the GMC UK.
Okay, recognized degree.
English language proficiency is also a critical gatekeeper. You'll typically need an IELTS academic test with an overall score of 7.5 and a minimum of 7.0 in each part: reading, writing, speaking, listening.
7.5 overall, 7.0 minimums. Pretty high bar.
It is. Or the OET, the Occupational English Test, with grade B or higher in each of the 4 components.
Clinical experience.
Yes, you need at least 12 months of internship or equivalent direct patient care experience after graduating.
Okay. Any time limits or attempt limits?
Yes. There's a maximum of 4 attempts for both PLAB 1 and PLAB 2. And here's a crucial detail. Once you pass PLAB 1, you must take PLAB 2 within 2 years.
Only 2 years.
Only 2 years. If you don't pass PLAB 2 within that time frame, you have to go back and retake PLAB 1.
Ouch. Extra cost, extra time.
Exactly. It creates a really time-sensitive imperative for IMGs. You need efficient planning and dedicated preparation to make that 2-year window work.
And what about the cost? You mentioned the travel for PLAB 2 adds quite a bit. Can you break down the financial commitment?
You're absolutely right. While the direct exam fees themselves are lower than USMLE PLAB 1 is around $273, and PLAB 2 about £998 as of April 2025.
Seems much lower initially.
It does, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There are GMC registration fees, typically over £450 for full registration, and then that's an annual fee too.
Okay, recurring costs there.
But the real cumulative cost, which we estimate between £2,500 to £4,000, is significantly boosted by that mandatory travel to Manchester for PLAB 2.
Flights, accommodation.
Flights, accommodation, local travel, UK visa costs, the English language test fees. And many people opt for PLAB 2 coaching courses, which can add another £400 to over £1,000.
The total climbs quickly.
It does. That geographic restriction for PLAB 2 means your financial planning must encompass these significant, unavoidable, non-exam related costs. It's not just about the exam fee. Again, precise figures will be in our show notes.
Good to know. So what does a solid preparation strategy look like for PLAB? How long does it usually take?
For PLAB 1, a realistic timeline is typically 3-4 months of consistent study. Some people even follow a more intensive 60-day plan if they're really focused.
Okay. And for PLAB 2?
For PLAB 2, it's usually about 6-8 weeks of really focused study, concentrating on the OSCE format and skills.
What resources are key here?
Popular resources include Plabable. They have question banks and notes. Samson Notes are well known. And importantly, reviewing official NHS clinical guidelines is crucial for understanding UK standards.
Right. Back to those NHS specifics.
Absolutely. BMJ Best Practice is useful too, and the official GMC website has practice materials. For PLAB 2 specifically, clinical OSCE guides, online video tutorials demonstrating examination techniques, and practicing with mannequins or simulators if you can get access are highly recommended.
So practice, practice, practice for the OSCE.
Definitely. And the emphasis on NHS guidelines means IMGs really have to adapt their knowledge to specific UK protocols and patient management approaches. Mock tests and OSCE simulations are critical, not just for knowledge, but for time management, communication practice, and building confidence, especially if you're not used to that OSCE format.
Makes sense. Once an IMG successfully passes both PLAB exams, what does the career pathway look like? How do they get a job in the NHS?
Okay, so passing PLAB 1 and 2 allows you to apply for full GMC registration. That registration is mandatory to practice medicine in the UK.
The license to practice.
Exactly. You can then apply for various non-consultant positions within the NHS. These might be Foundation Year 2, FY2 equivalent roles, or sometimes posts called Trust Grade or Junior Clinical Fellow positions.
So often starting at a junior level.
Yes, you should generally anticipate starting at an earlier career stage than perhaps your level of experience in your home country might suggest. PLAB is really a stepping stone into this system.
A way in, but not the final step.
Precisely. For specialty training, becoming a consultant cardiologist or surgeon, for example, you'll need to prepare for and pass further competitive Royal College exams, like the MRCP for physicians or MRCS for surgeons. And you typically do this while working in these non-training roles.
So more exams down the line for specialization.
Yes. And a current trend to be aware of is that the UK is increasingly prioritizing its own medical graduates for the limited number of specialty training positions.
Adds another layer of competition.
It does. Securing that first NHS job, especially a training post, can be competitive. So flexibility with location, maybe looking outside London or major cities and specialty can help. Gaining early NHS experience, even short clinical attachments or observerships, can strengthen your CV. And networking, of course.
Standard job search advice, but crucial here.
Yeah.
So wrapping up the PLAB pathway, what are the key advantages and disadvantages for an IMG?
Okay, pros. It's specifically designed for UK practice and the NHS. The direct exam costs are lower compared to the USMLE. The two-part structure might be perceived as simpler than USMLE's 3 steps, and it offers a clear pathway to GMC registration and getting that first NHS job.
Sounds pretty streamlined in some ways.
It can be. The cons, however, it's very UK-specific, so the qualification might not be as easily transferable to other countries. Unlike USMLE, which is geared towards residency, PLAB gets you a job, but maybe not a formal training post immediately. That PLAB 2 needing to be taken in the UK means significant travel and accommodation costs.
The Manchester trip.
Yep. There's high competition for the specialty training posts later on. Experienced IMGs starting in more junior roles can sometimes find that frustrating. And, as mentioned, that increasing trend of the UK prioritizing its own graduates for training spots.
Get a very clear picture of the UK route. All right, let's change continents again. Let's head down under to Australia and look at the AMC pathway. What's the Australian Medical Council exam all about?
Right, the AMC. The Australian Medical Council exam assesses the medical knowledge and clinical skills of overseas trained doctors against Australian standards for safe and effective healthcare. The AMC itself sets the benchmarks for medical education in Australia and is the body that assesses IMGs.
So, similar goal to PLAB, but for Australian standards.
Exactly. And the exam's purpose implies, again, that you need to do more than just recall medical facts. You'll need to really familiarize yourself with Australian clinical guidelines, common disease presentations there, specific healthcare practices. It reflects a significant need for both cultural and clinical adaptation.
Adaptation seems to be a running theme. What does the AMC exam look like in terms of structure? 2 parts again.
Yes, 2 main components. The AMC MCQ exam, which is part 1, is a computer-based test.
Multiple choice again.
Yep, 150 multiple choice questions. Interestingly, 120 are scored, but 30 are pilot questions. They're testing them out for future exams, so they don't count towards your score.
Trying out new questions. How long is it?
It lasts about 3.5 hours, so 200 minutes. It covers general and applied medical knowledge, critical thinking, knowledge integration. And like PLAB 1, it's held monthly worldwide from February to November.
Okay, accessible. And part 2. The clinical part.
Yes, the AMC Clinical Exam Part 2. This is another practical OSCE evaluating clinical skills, history taking, physical exam, diagnosis, management, communication, professionalism.
Similar format to PLAB 2 then.
Similar format, yes. It has 16 assess stations, each 10 minutes long, plus 4 rest stations built in. It covers a wide multidisciplinary range, general medicine, pediatrics, obs-and-gynae, surgery, psychiatry, but also specifically includes ethics and communication as distinct areas.
Ethics and communication explicitly tested.
Very explicitly. And what's particularly unique here, compared to maybe PLAB 2, is the clinical exam's stated emphasis on how candidates handle cultural and language barriers and its use of role-playing scenarios.
It's really testing that cultural competence piece.
Absolutely. It highlights that success involves actively adapting to Australian medical culture and demonstrating patient-centered communication skills in that specific context. It adds a layer of complexity beyond just the pure scientific or clinical assessment.
Given that emphasis on adaptation, what are the eligibility requirements for IMGs wanting to go down the AMC pathway?
Okay, first, you need that recognized primary medical qualification, your medical degree, from a World Directory listed school that meets either ECFMG or specific AMC requirements for verification.
Okay, degree check.
Then, credential verification is mandatory. You have to create an AMC account and get your documents verified through EPIC. That's the electronic portfolio of international credentials run by ECFMG, actually.
Right, EPIC again. How long does that take?
That verification process can take anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks, typically. It's a critical administrative step you have to complete before you can apply for the exams.
So plan that in early. English
Yeah.
test.
Yes, English language proficiency is key, set by the Medical Board of Australia. Typically, it's IELTS academic again, needing a score of 7 in each module. Reading, writing, speaking, listening, and an overall score of 7.
And then across the board.
Or the OET, needing grade B in each of the 4 modules. It's important to check the exact requirements as they can update.
Always check the source. Are there different pathways?
Yes, this is crucial. Most IMGs take what's called the standard pathway, which requires passing both the AMC MCQ and the clinical exam. However, other pathways exist. For example, the competent authority pathway.
What was that for?
That's for doctors who completed their training and registration in specific countries with healthcare systems deemed comparable, like the UK if you have GMC registration, the USA if you've completed the USMLE sequence and residency, Canada, New Zealand, Ireland. If you qualify for this pathway, you might be able to skip the AMC exams entirely and go straight to registration.
Big potential shortcut for some.
Huge. So step 1 is definitely figuring out which pathway applies to you. Don't assume it's the standard pathway.
Good advice. Any advantages to the AMC exams themselves?
A significant advantage of the AMC CAT MCQ examination Part 1 is that once you pass it, the result remains valid indefinitely.
Indefinitely. Wow, no expiry.
You have expiry date on the MCQ pass, which reduces some pressure compared to, say, the PLA1 2-year limit. Also, there's currently no set limit on the number of attempts you can have for Part 1, the MCQ.
Unlimited attempts for Part 1. That's interesting. Okay, let's talk money. We've covered structure, eligibility. What's the financial commitment for the AMC pathway? Looks expensive up front.
It is. The AMC pathway involves substantial costs, yeah. The MCQ exam authorization fee is currently around AUD $2,920.
Nearly $3,000 just to book the MCQ.
Yep. The clinical exam Part 2 is around AUD $3,991 if you take it in person in Australia, or AUD $4,391 if you opt for the online format they sometimes offer.
$4,000 or more for the clinical. Steep.
It is. And beyond the exam fees, there's a hefty cancellation fee if you book the MCQ and then pull out AUD $560. That's a lot to lose.
Ouch. Better be sure when you book.
Definitely. Plus the AMC portfolio application fee, which is around AUD $642. And those government charges for document verification via EPIC can be around AUD $1,000.
Adds up fast.
It really does. When you add in potential costs for work visas, if needed, maybe travel and living expenses for the clinical exam if you do it in person, the overall financial commitment can range anywhere from an estimated AUD 9,270 to AUD 13,900 or even more.
9 to 14,000 Aussie dollars. Wow.
Those high cancellation fees really underscore the financial risk involved. You truly need to be certain of your readiness before you commit to booking those exams. Precise figures, again, will be in our show notes.
That's a serious financial outlay. So what does a solid preparation strategy look like to maximize your chances, especially given the unique aspects and maybe the difficulty of the AMC exams?
For the AMC MCQ Part 1, generally 12-24 weeks, so about 3 to 6 months of dedicated study is often effective for most people.
Okay, decent chunk of time.
Key resources include the official AMC website. They have a syllabus and content blueprint, which is essential. They also have an official MCQ preparation app. John Murtaugh's general practice textbook is considered a Bible for Australian general practice.
Murtaugh's right to hear that one.
And the AMC Handbook of MCQs. Online resources like BMJ Learning, Geeky Medics for Clinical Skills, Life in the Fast Lane blog are also popular.
And for the clinical exam, Part 2.
For the clinical exam, the AMC Handbook of Clinical Assessment is key. Extensive practice with role plays is absolutely crucial. There are also popular sets of study notes, often referred to as Karen notes or VMPF notes, that many candidates use.
Role-playing for that communication piece.
Essential. Strategies for both parts really emphasize thorough review of major topics based on the blueprint and extensive practice with question banks and past papers to simulate exam conditions. The AMC MCQ, like USMLE Step 23, prioritizes clinical reasoning over pure rote memorization.
So thinking like an Australian doctor.
Pretty much. And the clinical exam, as we discussed, assesses diagnostic skills, communication, and clinical reasoning abilities specifically within that Australian context. Joining study groups or investing in professional coaching programs, especially for the clinical exam, can be incredibly beneficial for many IMGs.
Is coaching common, given the difficulty?
It's quite common, yeah. Because, and this is a challenging reality you have to face, the pass rates for the AMC exams can be tough. The MCQ Part 1 sits at approximately 58% pass rate.
Okay, just over half past the MCQ.
But it's the AMC Clinical Exam Part 2 that has historically had a notably low pass rate. It's been cited as low as 28% in the past.
20%? That's incredibly low.
It is stark, though it's important to note some more recent statistics seem to show improvement, maybe closer to 50-60% pass rates in some recent cohorts, but historically it's been very challenging.
Still, even 50-60% is tough for a high-stakes clinical exam.
Absolutely. It highlights the significant difficulty. This means you must commit to extensive, high-quality preparation. Just winging it is not an option, especially for Part 2. Professional coaching might be a very worthwhile investment for many.
That's a really important heads up. With those challenging pass rates in mind, what about the career pathways and actually getting registered to practice in Australia once an IMG does pass these exams?
Okay, so passing both AMC exams, the MCQ, and the clinical leads to receiving the AMC certificate. That certificate is a key requirement for applying for general registration with AHPRA.
HPR.
The Australian Health Practitioner Regulation Agency. They're the body that registers all health professionals in Australia.
Got it. So AMC certificate, AHPRA registration.
Yes. Interestingly, provisional registration might even be possible after passing just AMC Part 1 and meeting the English language requirement. This could allow you to start working in a supervised practice position while you prepare for or wait to take the clinical exam.
Ah, so you could potentially start working sooner.
Potentially, yes, in a supervised role. Once you achieve general registration after passing both parts, you can apply for non-consultant positions in public hospitals roles like intern, though usually IMGs enter higher, JMO, junior medical officer, RMO, resident medical officer, or even registrar, depending on your experience level.
So various hospital roles available.
Yes. Full registration, of course, opens up more employment options, including private practice eventually. But initial employment for IMGs almost always starts in supervised roles within the hospital system.
What's the job market like currently?
What's advantageous here for IMGs is that Australia is currently experiencing a significant shortage of doctors.
Really, a shortage?
Yes, particularly in rural and regional areas, but even in some specialties in cities. This creates a generally favorable job market for IMGs right now. There are estimates of over 5,000 current openings for doctors across the country.
5,000 openings. That sounds promising.
It is promising. That indefinite validity of the AMC MCQ result also offers a significant advantage, reducing that immediate time pressure we talked about with PLAB.
True. No 2-year clock ticking.
However, the low pass rate for the clinical exam and potential backlogs in getting a spot to sit the clinical exam can still mean substantial hurdles and delays to achieving that full registration and securing your ideal role.
So pros and cons even within the job market aspect. Any tips for the job search itself?
Yeah, apply through the state and territory health department recruitment portals. They manage public hospital jobs. Prepare a strong CV tailored to Australian standards. Be open, initially at least, to working in regional or rural hospitals where the demand is often highest and opportunities might be more readily available. And building local experience through observerships, if possible, can also help.
Good practical advice. So to summarize the AMC pathway then, what are the key pros and cons overall?
Okay, on the positive side, it directly assesses competence for Australian medical standards. The MCQ Part 1 results are valid indefinitely. There's no set limit on MCQ attempts. There's currently a high demand for doctors, creating a favorable job market. And there are clear routes to registration and employment, potentially even starting supervised work after Part 1.
Strong points, especially the job market and indefinite MCQ.
Definitely. The cons, however, the exams are very difficult, especially the clinical exam with its historically low pass rate. There are substantial financial costs involved, as we discussed. It requires significant adaptation to Australian guidelines and clinical culture. There can be potential backlogs in scheduling that clinical exam. And while the job market is favorable overall, securing that very first job can sometimes still take time and effort.
Got it. A pathway with great opportunity, but significant hurdles too. Okay, that's a fantastic, comprehensive overview of each individual pathway. Now let's try and zoom out a bit and do a comparative analysis, put them head to head. When it comes to just the sheer difficulty of the exams and the overall pathway, how do the USMLE, PLAB, and AMC stack up against each other in your view?
Okay, difficulty. Generally, the USMLE is considered the most complex and difficult overall pathway.
Overall pathway, okay.
It demands years of intense, often described as brutal, relentless studying. The exams themselves are punishingly long, 8 to 9 hours. The question style can sometimes feel ambiguous. And even with step 1 being pass-fail now, its pass rate for non-US Canadian students was still only around 72–74% when it was scored.
Still tough.
But the real kicker that makes the USMLE pathway arguably the hardest to complete successfully from start to independent practice is that incredibly competitive U.S. residency match. That adds a huge layer of challenge beyond just passing the exam.
The match is the big filter. What about PLAB?
The PLAB is often perceived as comparatively easier than the USMLE exam-wise. PLAB 1 is seen as more recall-based, focusing on common UK clinical scenarios. Overall pass rates for PLAB 1 and 2 usually hover around 70–75%, which sounds quite good.
Higher pass rate generally.
Generally. However, PLAB 2, the OSCE part, can still have a comparatively high failure rate for some cohorts, particularly because of that communication skills component, which can trip up people not used to the UK style.
So the OSCE is the hurdle there, and AMC.
For the AMC, the MCQ Part 1 has that pass rate of about 58%, which is certainly challenging, significantly harder than PLAB 1 seems to be.
Yeah, 58% is tough.
But it's the AMC Clinical Exam Part 2 that's widely considered extremely hard, with that historically incredibly low pass rates, sometimes cited as low as 28%, although maybe improving recently to 50–60%. Many international doctors consider the AMC pathway the most difficult overall, specifically because the sheer rigor and low pass rate of that Part 2 clinical exam.
So different parts are the toughest in each system.
Yeah.
How would you rank them purely on exam difficulty, maybe?
If you're just ranking the exams themselves, you might say something like USMLE steps are very hard. The AMC clinical is extremely hard, perhaps harder than any single USMLE step for many, while PLAB might be seen as the most achievable exam set overall.
But pathway-wise?
Pathway-wise, considering everything from study time to exams to getting the job or training post, the USMLE pathway is generally seen as the most challenging overall due to the residency competition bottleneck. So maybe USMLE pathway, AMC pathway due to clinical exam, PLAB pathway in terms of overall difficulty perception, but it's subjective too.
Wow, that's a crucial distinction between exam difficulty and pathway difficulty. Very helpful. Let's talk money again. We broke down the costs for each, but side by side, which pathway typically takes the prize for the highest overall financial commitment?
Right, the bottom line, the USMLE consistently represents the highest overall financial commitment, generally speaking.
Why is that?
It's due to multiple expensive exam steps, those international surcharges of taken abroad, the need for extensive and often recurring, if you need more time preparation materials like UWorld subscriptions, and then critically, the substantial costs associated with applying widely for residency programs. Those application fees really add up.
Okay, USMLE likely the priciest.
Yeah.
How does PLAB compare them?
PLAB has lower direct exam fees, significantly lower, but as we discussed, the total cost gets elevated quite a bit by the mandatory travel and accommodation for PLAB 2 in Manchester, plus the English tests, visa fees, and optional coaching. So the total estimate comes in around £2,500 to £4,000. Still significant, but generally less than the USMLE total.
And AMC, where does that fit in?
The AMC has substantial upfront exam fees, nearly AUD $3,000 for the MCQ, around AUD $4,000 or more for the clinical, plus the portfolio application, credential verification, potential travel living costs for the clinical exam, pushing the total estimate to anywhere from AUD $9,270 to AUD $13,900.
So ranking them roughly on cost.
Roughly, the ranking for total expected outlay is generally USMLE, AMC, PLAB. But it's absolutely critical to remember that all three require a very significant financial investment. Far beyond just the direct exam fees listed on the websites, you need to budget comprehensively.
Absolutely. Don't just look at the exam fee. What about time commitment? From the moment you decide, okay, I'm doing this, starting the prep, to actually achieving full independent practice in that country, which takes the longest?
The USMLE pathway typically involves the longest overall time commitment by quite a margin.
Why so long?
Well, you have the multi-step examinations themselves, which require extensive preparation, often spanning many months, if not years, sometimes started during medical school. Then there's the lengthy residency match process, applying, interviewing, waiting for match day. And then you have the 3 to 6 years of residency training itself before you're fully licensed for independent practice.
Right, the residency is a big chunk of time.
Yeah.
How about PLAB?
PLAB generally requires shorter exam preparation times, typically 3–4 months maybe for PLAB 1 and 6 to 8 weeks for PLAB 2. So getting through the exams can be quicker. However, that 2-year validity window for PLAB 1 does add a clear time pressure to keep moving. And then getting into specialty training takes more time and exams.
And AMC.
For the AMC, preparation for the MCQ Part 1 might take 12-24 weeks, so 3-6 months. Getting through both exams and achieving full registration, assuming you pass first time and there are no major delays with clinical exam spots, might take anywhere from 1 to 1.5 years, maybe a bit longer. Then you start working, usually supervised initially.
So ranking them on total time to independent practice.
Yeah, generally the ranking would be USMLE, longest due to residency. AMC takes time to get through exams and registration. PLAB, potentially quickest to initial practice, but longer for full specialty training. Again, these are broad strokes.
Very useful comparison points. Finally, let's compare the job prospects and career progression opportunities for IMGs within each of these systems once they've navigated the exams and registration.
Okay, job prospects. For the USMLE, successfully matching into a U.S. residency offers access to truly top-tier training, incredibly diverse specialization options, and abundant research opportunities. It sets you up for potentially very high-level careers.
That's the catch.
The catch is getting there. As we hammered home, the residency match is highly competitive for IMGs, with those match rates typically in the 50-67% range, depending on how you count it. Getting in is the hard part.
Right. What about PLAB in the UK?
The PLAB pathway leads to GMC registration and entry into junior NHS positions, like FY2 equivalent or trust grade roles. So it's a clear entry point into the system. However, progression to specialty training requires passing those further competitive Royal College exams. And it's important to keep in mind that the UK is increasingly prioritizing its own medical graduates for those limited training positions, making progression potentially harder for IMGs now than it used to be.
So getting a job is feasible, but getting a training job is tougher.
Exactly. And AMC in Australia. The AMC pathway allows application for supervised practice roles, potentially even after Part 1 and meeting English requirements, leading to full registration after Part 2. The big plus here is that Australia currently has that strong demand for doctors, especially in rural and regional areas. This creates a generally favorable job market for IMGs looking for work and offers a clear path into supervised practice roles within the hospital system.
So maybe easier to find a job in Australia currently.
Generally speaking, yes, the demand side is favorable. Getting the exact job you want in the exact location might still take effort, but finding a suitable medical officer position is often very achievable.
So summarizing the career outlook.
Overall, you could say, USMLE offers the most prestigious and diverse long-term career opportunities if you can overcome the highly competitive residency match entry barrier. The AMC provides a currently favorable job market and a clear path to supervised practice, making it attractive despite its challenging clinical exam. And PLAB offers a direct route into junior NHS roles, but requires further effort and faces increasing competition for progression into formal specialty training. Each has a different risk-reward profile on the career front.
That's a fantastic summary. We've certainly taken a deep dive today into the USMLE, PLAB, and AMC pathways for international medical graduates. And I think it's crystal clear that the journey for any IMG seeking to practice medicine abroad is, well, it's demanding, regardless of the pathway you choose.
It absolutely is. And it's so important to reiterate that there's truly no universal best path here. There's no single right answer.
Definitely not.
The right choice depends entirely on your individual priorities, what matters most to you. Your financial capacity, what can you realistically afford? The time you can commit, how long are you prepared for this process to take? Your adaptability, how ready are you to learn a new healthcare system and new cultural nuances? And ultimately, your personal resilience to navigate the inevitable challenges.
That self-assessment piece is critical. So maybe just to summarize, the best fit idea for each pathway, based on what we've discussed. For those listening who are really prioritizing prestigious, highly specialized training and want broad, long-term career diversity, perhaps the USMLE stands out.
It does, but with the huge caveat that you understand it's typically the most expensive and time-consuming pathway, and you have to be prepared for those highly competitive residency match rates. The barrier to entry is high.
Okay. And for those seeking maybe a relatively quicker entry into a well-established national healthcare system with a clear, albeit potentially more junior starting point, maybe the PLAB pathway to the UK is more viable.
It could be, yes. Just make sure you factor in those mandatory travel costs for PLAB 2 in Manchester, budget for them, and understand the need for further competitive exams later on if you want formal specialty progression alongside that increasing competition.
Right. And finally, for individuals looking for a stable job market right now, with diverse opportunities in a developed healthcare system, even if it means facing a particularly challenging clinical examination, perhaps the AMC pathway to Australia presents a compelling choice.
It certainly does, especially given Australia's current doctor shortage creating that demand. But you have to be ready for the rigor of that clinical exam part 2 and be prepared to genuinely adapt to Australian clinical guidelines and culture. Don't underestimate that part.
Excellent summaries. As you listening consider your path, weighing up all these factors we've discussed today, here's maybe a final provocative thought for you to mull over. What specific aspect of this entire complex journey, whether it's the sheer financial investment required, the significant time commitment involved, the challenge of cultural and clinical adaptation, or the competitive nature of entry and progression, what single aspect stands out as the most crucial factor you personally need to self-assess thoroughly before you actually embark on your chosen path?
That's the key question to ask yourself.